Hey there, Beatle fans. How are you today? This is January the
9th.
Already. Wow.
So we're looking at the highlights of January 9th through the years, all Beatle-related historical events, and we're going to give you some of our interesting opinions and comments on all these things.
Hey, did you know on this day back in 1975, and I actually remember this, the Beatles were officially dissolved as a band on this day back in 1975.
And that's because John Lennon finally signed the papers after he had complained about how crappy it all was. And at that time, he was actually with May Pang and his son Julian.
In L.A., I believe, wasn't it? Yeah. I think so.
So historic moment, officially dissolving it. Of course, they had all been on Apple Records up until 1975. So that's probably why that all got terminated as well.
I think so.
And then, of course, it would lead to John, by the end of the year, retiring from the business.
I remember that, yeah. Rock and Roll was the last album to be officially released during that period, I believe. But they were from the 1973 recording sessions with Phil Spector. Was that not correct? Yeah, I remember that. That's how old I am. That's, you know, I still...
He's old.
Yeah, well, we were little kids. We have to say that. We were very young, but still remember it. Also on this day, 1965, I Feel Fine became a #1 single in the U.S.
It was actually its third week at #1 in the U.S. And that was one of their longest running #1 singles at the time. 1964 had been an amazing breakthrough year for the Beatles in America, and they ended it off with this #1 song. And also in America at the same time, they had released the album Beatles 65, which came out in late 64 for the Christmas market, but would be the first #1 album of 1965, and again it was an American-only release. It was different packaging of some of the songs from the album Beatles for Sale in England. And again, we grew up with the American version, so Beatles 65 is an album I listened to.
That's right.
I didn't hear Beatles for Sale, technically, until I was an adult, you know, getting the CDs in the 80s. So.
And also George Harrison's My Sweet Lord went to #1 on this day as well in 1971.
And I think that was its second week at #1. And actually that's historic because while it was at its second week at #1 is actually when I was born. So My Sweet Lord was the #1 song in the world the day I was born. So I actually call that my birth song.
Right, that was 2 months after I was born. I remember. Yeah. That's similar, yeah.
So, and of course I have always had this connection with George. It's not my favorite song of his by far, but All Things Must Pass, of course, is the album it came from.
Wait a minute, why did you go, yeah.
There you go. Can't
just
help
kidding,
it.
just kidding.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think what else.
In 1968, on this date, George Harrison's recording the album Wonderwall, which is his first solo album, featuring sitar instrumental music for the movie Wonderwall, which would come out later this year. And this was a significant step for the Beatles because it was George's first solo album while he's still in the band. So again, George is showing his growth as a songwriter.
So that was the first solo Beatles album while they were together? Is that what you're saying?
Unless you count The Family Way.
I was just going to say that, by
which
Paul
is
McCartney.
Paul McCartney.
Yes.
So technically that one should count, because in both cases, Paul and George were the songwriters, but didn't play on these albums. And they're both from movie soundtracks. So technically, Family Way would be the first solo album. But I think the difference is that The Family Way is more traditional, and it had nothing to do with this idea of Paul leaving the band. No. But I think when George is now working on this, the band has got issues, and it's sort of the sign of, okay, the band is separating, going their own ways. So I think from that point, it's sort of
That's a good point.
Significant.
That's true. I do remember that. And you know, in 1984, this is getting a little bit more recent, at least for us older guys. That John Lennon and Yoko Ono's single "Nobody Told Me" came out in 1984 on this day, as well as, well, the B-side was "Oh Sanity" by Yoko Ono, but "Nobody Told Me" was a good song. I thought it was a great tune from the from the Milk and Honey sessions, which was a John Lennon album destined to be released in 1981, but as we all know, had to wait until 1984 to come out.
So he obviously recorded it in 1980 before he died,
He did.
and it was shelved until Yoko decided to release it
That's
with
right.
the same fashion as the Double Fantasy album, kind of 7 of his songs, 7 of hers.
Yeah.
And yes, I am a Yoko fan. Everybody knows that. And so I usually prefer her songs to John's. But I will say nobody told me it's a really strong single. It was John's very last top 10 hit on the radio he ever had. And yes, it did come 4 years after his death.
Yeah.
And Oh Sanity, the B-side by Yoko. Yeah, I love that song.
It's not as good as John's side, though.
Yeah,
sorry, Yoko. I respect you, but come on.
She gets the silver medal.
Okay, the silver medal. But nobody told me it's still a great song. I think.
Yeah. And you know, also on this date in 1967, January the 9th, they were finishing up the sessions for Penny Lane, and they brought in all the symphony players who actually added the flute and trumpet parts that make that song so iconic now.
That's true, yeah.
So the song, you know, if you've heard any early outtakes from any bootleg albums where all those instruments are not included, it really feels empty. So I really like the idea of the flutes and trumpets that were added, and we'll thank George Martin for that.
Thank George for that. Thank you, George. Yeah, very much so.
I think that's our favorite things that happened on this date, January 9th. So we'd like to thank you for watching. Give us some comments down below and let us know what you think. And throw us your 2 cents. Maybe you can teach us some interesting facts based on all these events.
There's a lot of Beatle fans out there. A lot of people know a lot of things about the Beatles.
They sure do. We're all crazy fanatics, right? We just love this stuff.
I still want to get into talking about unreleased recordings, film and music-wise as well.
All right. Stay tuned in because we want you to be there for that. We're going to have a lot of fun.
We've got to get that webcam set up for all the fans so we can all interact.
All right.
Let's get that happening. Okay. Anyway, good to talk to you. I'm Glenn. This is Terry. So
we'll
take
see
care.
you tomorrow.
See ya. Bye.
So my dear friends, come back when you can.